blind nut. There's no kernel there.
Okay, but look, Americans say, I love you about 180 times a day, and still they are very, very more than often empty inside.
They don't even know you.
No, absolutely, but they...
The first thing, I love you all.
Occupant.
And it's like saying bye-bye
Yeah.
on the phone. Like saying bye-bye.
Isn't this a
We're
very...
using this expression.
I was going to slightly change the subject, but what I was going to say is irrelevant. So, but maybe we could look at your question and put it in my context, and that is that once upon a time, all of our parts were blended together in some cosmic explosion that began the universe, and it spread out and it expanded and somehow condensed, and there was one speck which was called the Milky Way galaxy, and it fragmented in billions of stars, and some of these stars developed little planets around them, and here we are on one of these planets, and accumulations of all kinds of materials, and out of the ocean crawled some organic goo, and eventually out of a miracle of a miracle of a miracle of a miracle, we evolved. And it's very, very likely that something like this never happened, never will happen in this whole universe. And so it seems to me that when you ask the question, is life worth living, it's kind of sacrilegious on a much deeper sense than religious. It's sacrilegious in a spiritual sense, that somehow this miracle happened, that we're alive. Miracle is defined as something of extremely low probability.
Okay.
But you have violated the strongest of the modern taboos, which is not to talk about religion.
Would you allow the hypothesis, when you speak of the miracle, would you allow the question that if that miracle has led to mass extermination, as it has, to sadism on a scale inconceivable to the human mind, to a planet on which 3/5 of people are hungry, would you still opt? This is where the notion of miracle troubles me. It's an anthropomorphic notion, and it's a notion which prejudges the results. Now, it may well be right, not, but I think there is behind your remark the immense good luck of our very privileged way of living, of our tinily privileged and rewarded way of living. For the children, and it's been massive, as you know, in this latest war, last week's war, till next week's, who have both arms and legs cut off in the African war, the notion that this has been a miracle, sorry, I can't buy it. I have no better answer. But I would be very, very careful about the teleology of the utopian in your very poignant and very eloquent remark.
Well, again, I only repeat, perhaps I shouldn't have used the word, but a more technical word would be boring. But I just mean it a process of extremely low probability. Therefore, it's not meant to imply that somebody organized this. I don't believe anybody organized this. I think it just happened.
And you approve?
Oh, no, approve. That's a personal opinion, which I was told that you shouldn't express.
Right.
There is the thing, going back to this question of understanding, it is curious. I mean, that is certainly one of the things that, to many of us, gives you the sense, or I think to many people, gives the sense that this is worthwhile. Life is waiting for these explanations, which seem to tumble forward. And there is a kind of, as a group. I mean, it seems to me there's two kinds of discussion going on. One being, has been a worthwhile life as seen from the outside, as seen from a group, what you've done, what these people have accomplished, what Jane Goodall was saying. And then from the other side, internally, what does it feel that life is worth living or not? And these are, is it worthwhile or not? These are separable things. But one of the things I think that is motivating, at least, if we can use that word, is the idea that these things are going to be explained. Germaine Greer raised the question of, can we really talk about, is life worthwhile from the point of view of the brain soup? And of course we can, because things like depression, things like elation, things like, yeah, I feel what is the brain state that says this is all worthwhile and I feel great and it's good about it? We do know a lot about that, and we discover more about that all the time. It's fun waiting for that. It's motivating. It does seem to give a point to it. And the same on the other side with the physics. Maybe in the end we really will understand all that. So I see these two kinds of things going together here, though. I mean, is it worth all that effort looked at as the horror that it's created or as the goodness that, or whatever word you want to use, that it's done? That's one kind of discussion. And then there's another kind of discussion is from inside your own shell, inside your own world, is it worth it?
Please bear in mind that one of the paradoxes is that the object of the waiting or of the obsession can be totally trivial. Men have killed for a postage stamp. Oh, yeah. Men have given their lives to finding one subspecies of an orchid. One of the mysteries, and Nietzsche was about the only one to be frank on this, he said much more powerful than love or hatred is being interested in something, and which is absolutely right. And then there's no use saying don't be interested in such a trivial thing. Exactly absolutely right. No use. One cannot negotiate one's passions. One shouldn't, even if they are somewhat murderous. And if you live your passion totally, probably most of what we're talking about is beautifully irrelevant. And what there is, if you're right, I have no confidence even to raise, maybe there is a synapse of obsession, maybe there is a wiring of total interest, and that neurochemistry will one day teach us about it, but I doubt very much whether it can explain the magnificent, well, that kitsch title, Magnificent Obsession, the totality of commitment to something inherently. We have a recent case which takes my breath away. A South American collector paid millions for 2 identical stamps, they're the only 2, and then burnt the one immediately. And the logic, the power of logic in that, it numbs me by its cold intelligence.
Yes. Were they identical, George?
Yes, 2 identical. And now
how did he choose?
But you see, but that
or was it arbitrary?
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. I think that what will be learned is what that state is, that state that allows you to be interested. But the machine will never, but what won't be explained is what the interest is directed at. But whether the interest is there or not, that kind of business is the business of the brain people.
May I make a question? Why do we need so much consolation? Why is this theme beauty and consolation, and why not interest and inspiration? Why do we all need consoling all the time?
I think that's actually one of the things that discriminates between people, distinguishes people. Past the age of 40, I think it comes into play. There's a lot of people who actually are quite miserable with the way it all turned out and resent their fate and are bitter about it and find themselves very unhappy about it. And there's another group of people who simply aren't, who say, well, I did this right and that right, and it's turned out well, and they're quite happy with it. I think
but there's a third choice, isn't there, saying that's just what happened.
Of course there is. I'm talking statistically here. If we go about and go out into the world and ask past age 40, and you poll the population or do whatever you like, deal with them as patients, whatever you do, you'll find that that is a source of great misery or a great source of great solace as to what has happened in their lives. And perhaps it's the case that everyone here, being very successful, would answer the question, well, yes, of course. Of course, we take consolation in our past. But is it the case that a large number of people past a certain age trace the bulk of their misery to the fact that their lives, that these things happened in their lives? And I think the answer to that question is yes.
But what can console us for the Holocaust? I don't understand. What can console us for Hiroshima? There is no consolation. How would looking back on your own life console you for that? How can you be consoled for the loss of species? How can you be consoled for the salination of Western Australia by thinking back on your own life?
But surely the nature of that question is essentially solipsistic, as most of the questions are.
Well, I wanted to just remind people around this table of something that they already know, which is the whole philosophical tradition, which starts with Socrates' assertion that the unexamined life is not worth living. The tradition which which finds the meaning and the redemption of the individual life in the retrospective vision of it. You know, that you elicit that meaning from it now, looking back over it, when you see it as all unchangeable. And obviously the high point in this came in our century with Proust, but it's there in all our literature and all our religion, actually, in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
But you know, Roger, Socrates did not mean looking for the ineffable personal meaning of your personal life. He meant asking questions like, what is justice, what is piety, and so on, all those
sure,
questions.
okay, but he started, nevertheless, this tradition of thinking that life itself should be examined, and it can't be examined before it's happened. It can only be examined after it's happened. If the question is, you know, what is your
but to
consolation
think about
in
life is much more productive than to think about your own life, because you can't change your own life, but you might just possibly, in a little time you've got left, be able to change something about the future of somebody else's life or your family's life,
well,
whatever.
Hang on. Thinking about something does change it, especially when it's something in the past, because all that it is a memory. This is the whole purpose of Proust's book, to show that that material is now infinitely malleable, now that it is over and done with. Because you can elicit the meaning in it by rearranging it, by seeing connections in it which couldn't ever have been discovered at the time. And I'd have thought that this is one of the few things that distinguishes our condition from that of everything else on our planet, and in times of trouble can make us think that, phew, you know, there's something that I can still do.
As memory fails, what happens is confabulation. And one of the things that's going on in La Recherche du Temps Perdu is confabulation. It's constructing a past that never happened. The past is not text. I mean, one of the things we do is we write the apologia for our lives. When we do all that re-remembering, we actually reorganize events in order to make them palatable. That's one of the ways in which we construct personality. It's one of the ways we invent ourselves day by day and continue to justify our behaviors. But it ought not to offer us consolation. We ought to be unconsoled. We ought to be unconsolable. I reject consolation. I don't want it. I don't want to feel better about the way this world is. Indeed, I think I ought to be working harder at feeling a good deal worse.
I don't want to work at making things worse or better. I'd rather not do that. I know that when I look back, I have a great deal of anger, you know, for obvious reasons. I feel that I would rather have spent a certain number of years in some other direction than dealing